I was folding laundry at my kitchen table when my friend casually mentioned her pension. Same company, same years of service, same amount. She lived alone, travelled twice a year, and never worried about money. Meanwhile, my own daughter handed me $400 a month like an allowance. That was the moment something finally stopped adding up, and I wish I'd trusted that feeling a lot sooner. I'm Phyllis. I was 73 years old when the numbers finally forced me to stop looking the other way. Widowed, retired, and raised in a generation where you didn't question your children, especially not the one who took you in. 8 years earlier, after my husband passed, I packed up my little ranch house in Dayton and moved in with my daughter Courtney outside Columbus. It made sense at the time. The house felt too quiet, too big, and Courtney insisted it would only be temporary until I got back on my feet, though I wasn't quite sure what that meant at my age. Courtney handled everything: the bills, the mail, the bank statements. "Mum, you've done enough," she'd say, waving me off with one hand while scrolling on her phone with the other. "Let me take care of you now." Every month, she handed me $400 in cash, folded neatly, almost ceremonially. "For your personal things," she'd say, haircuts, church donations, little gifts for the grandkids. She told me the rest of my pension covered housing, groceries, utilities, medical expenses. And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? My days were simple: coffee percolating in the mornings, the hum of the dishwasher, Reader's Digest on the side table. I cooked when I could, folded laundry, tried not to feel like a guest in my own daughter's home. Looking back, the red flags were there: Courtney's new car, designer bags that seemed to rotate weekly, work bonuses, she said, trips she called conferences. I never pressed. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Then one afternoon, over soup at Panera, my friend Margaret mentioned her pension. Same employer, same job classification, same years of service. She lived alone in a senior apartment and talked about a cruise she'd just booked. I smiled, nodded, drove home in silence. That night, lying awake, staring at the ceiling fan, I felt something shift. Not anger, not yet. Just a quiet, steady unease. The kind that doesn't let you sleep. The next morning, while Courtney was at work, I sat at the kitchen table and picked up the phone. And that decision would cost her more than money. The woman on the phone from the pension office spoke slowly, the way people do when they assume age means fragility. I didn't correct her. I've learned patience can be useful. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I can mail you a full payment history. How far back would you like?" "All of it," I replied. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "From the beginning." She hesitated. "That's 8 years, Mrs. Whitaker." "I know," I said. "That's exactly what I want." When I hung up, I sat there for a long time with my hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and toast crumbs. Everything looked the same. That's what unsettled me the most. If something had been wrong for years, shouldn't the world look different once you noticed it? Courtney came home that evening with takeout from Chipotle and a story about her boss being impossible. She talked while I set the table, the clink of forks against plates sounding louder than usual. "Mum, you barely touched your food," she said, glancing at my bowl. "You feeling okay?" "Oh, I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Over the next few days, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Not snooping, just noticing. Courtney's car payment reminder flashed on her phone screen when she set it down. $850 a month. I did the math automatically. I couldn't help it. One afternoon, I opened the refrigerator to find it nearly empty, except for almond milk, pre-cut fruit, and a container labeled meal prep. Courtney said groceries were expensive these days. I nodded. But I remembered feeding a family of 4 on less. I told myself I was being paranoid. Grief does strange things, people say. Age, too. I'd heard all the excuses, and I tried them on myself like old coats that didn't quite fit anymore. When the envelope finally arrived, it was thicker than I expected. Heavy. Official. I waited until Courtney left for work before opening it. The paper felt stiff between my fingers. My hands trembled just enough that I noticed. Page after page. Same amount. Every month. $200 deposited into the same account. Courtney's account. Not a joint account. Not a trust. Just hers. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I simply sat there, listening to the grandfather clock in the hallway mark the seconds I could never get back. 8 years. Over $300,000. That evening, Courtney breezed in, talking about a weekend trip she had planned. Just a little getaway, she said. Work thing. I looked at her face. My face, really, mirrored back at me with fewer lines and more confidence. I wondered when the shift had happened, when care turned into entitlement. Courtney, I said carefully, how much do you think it costs to take care of me? She laughed. Actually laughed. Mum, you don't want to get into that. It all evens out. That was the first time she'd ever dismissed me outright. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay there staring at the dark ceiling, replaying small moments I'd brushed off for years. The way she rushed to collect the mail. The way she spoke for me at doctor's appointments. The way she'd say, Mum doesn't need to worry about that. Like worry was the problem, not ignorance. The next morning, I made a decision. Not a big one. Just a small, quiet one. I called my friend Margaret again. I need to ask you something, I said. And I need you to be honest. By the time I hung up, my stomach felt hollow. Not with hunger, with clarity. Courtney came home late that night. I heard her car pull into the driveway, the gravel crunching under tires. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, pension statements spread neatly in front of me. The door opened. Her keys jingled. She stepped into the room and stopped cold. What's all this? She asked. I folded my hands and looked up at her. That's when she realized I knew. Courtney stood there longer than I expected, her hand still on the doorframe, her purse slipping down her arm. For a brief second, she looked like a child caught doing something she couldn't explain away. Then her face settled into something familiar, controlled, practical, annoyed. Why are my bank statements on the table? She asked. They're not your bank statements, I said quietly. They're mine. She sighed and dropped her purse onto the counter like the conversation was already boring her. Mum, I had a long day. Can we not do this right now? That tone. I'd heard it before. Every time I asked about money. Every time I wondered aloud whether $400 a month was enough. I had accepted that tone as care, as protection. Now it sounded like something else entirely. We're doing it now, I said. I slid the top page toward her. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd imagined shaking, tears, raised voices. None of that came. Just a deep, bone-tired calm. She glanced at the paper, then away. I told you I handle all that. You told me wrong, I replied. Every deposit went into your account, every month, for 8 years. She crossed her arms. So? That one word landed heavier than any apology ever could have. So? I repeated slowly. That's over $300,000? She rolled her eyes. actually rolled them. Mum, you lived here. You ate here. I drove you to appointments. I put my life on hold. I thought about all the afternoons I'd eaten soup alone while she worked late, all the appointments I'd waited for rides to, all the times I'd reminded myself not to be a burden. You didn't put your life on hold, I said. You upgraded it. Her jaw tightened. That money was payment? I leaned back in my chair and studied her the way I used to study office spreadsheets when something didn't add up. Payment implies agreement, I said. I never agreed. She waved her hand. You're being dramatic. That word. Dramatic. As if math could be emotional. I gathered the papers slowly, smoothing the edges. My husband used to tease me about that habit. Said I treated paper better than people sometimes. Maybe he was right. That night, I barely slept. Not from shock. Shock passes quickly. What lingered were the memories. The times I'd defended Courtney to relatives. She's doing her best, I'd said. She takes good care of me. I realized something then that hurt worse than the theft. She hadn't hidden it well because she hadn't needed to. She assumed I'd never look. The next morning, I called the pension office again. Then I called a legal aid clinic. The woman there listened without interrupting, which felt like a gift. What you're describing is financial exploitation of an elderly person, she said. The word exploitation felt sharp, ugly, final. Courtney noticed the shift immediately. She hovered more, asked questions, tried jokes, brought home flowers. Peace offering, she said, setting them on the counter. I thanked her and put them in water. I didn't mention the police report form sitting folded inside my purse. That weekend, she sat across from me at breakfast and said, You know, if you make this a big deal, it'll destroy our family. I looked at my hands. Older hands now, veins visible, still capable. I didn't destroy anything, I said. I just noticed. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Who's going to believe you? You live here. You agreed to everything. That's when I understood something important. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong. That afternoon, I drove to a senior apartment complex Margaret recommended. The lobby smelled like coffee and furniture polish. The woman at the desk spoke to me like an adult. I filled out an application. When I came home, Courtney was on the phone whispering angrily. She looked up, saw the brochure in my hand, and went pale. What's that? She asked. I met her eyes. My next address. Her mouth opened, then closed. You can't just leave. I can, I said. And I am. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I walked into the police station with my documents neatly organized in a folder. In that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I didn't tell Courtney where I was going when I left the house that morning. I didn't owe her that anymore. The police station was only 15 minutes away, but it felt longer. Every stoplight gave my mind another chance to second-guess myself. That old instinct kicked in, the one that says, keep the peace, don't embarrass the family, handle things quietly. I walked past it anyway. The officer who took my statement was younger than my youngest grandchild. He listened carefully, asked questions without rushing me, and never once looked skeptical. That mattered more than he probably realized. When I slid the folder across the desk, bank records, pension statements, timelines, I saw his eyebrows lift just slightly. This is very thorough, he said. I worked in administration for 30 years, I replied. I know how paper tells the truth. The investigation didn't move fast. Real life rarely does. But Courtney moved quickly the moment she realized I was serious. She started with guilt. Long messages on my phone about sacrifice and stress, how hard it had been after Dad died, how she'd lost herself taking care of me. I didn't reply. Then came anger, accusations that I was ungrateful, that I was senile, that people were putting ideas in my head. She called my sister and told her I was confused. My sister called me worried. "Phyllis," she said gently, "are you sure you understand what's happening?" I closed my eyes and counted to 3. "I understand perfectly," I said. "Do you want to see the numbers?" She didn't answer right away. Courtney tried something else next. She suggested we handle it privately. A repayment plan. No police, no courts. She said she'd start giving me more money each month. Like that fixed anything. I said no. That's when she reminded me whose house I was living in. I found the typed notice on my bed one afternoon. 30 days, formal language, legal-looking font she probably copied from the internet. My chest tightened, but only for a moment. I'd already been approved for the apartment. I packed slowly, carefully, folding sweaters I'd owned longer than Courtney's marriage, placing photos into albums, deciding what mattered. Courtney hovered in the doorway while I packed. "You're really doing this," she said, shaking her head. "You're choosing strangers over your own daughter." I didn't look up. "I'm choosing myself." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Good luck. When this blows up, don't expect me to save you." I moved out 2 weeks later. My new apartment was small, clean, and quiet. The radiator clicked at night. The hallway smelled like laundry detergent and coffee. No one watched what I ate or asked where my money went. The prosecutor called a month later. Charges were being filed. Financial exploitation of an elderly person. A felony. Courtney called that night, screaming, crying, begging, threatening. All in the same conversation. "You don't understand what you've done," she said. "They're freezing my accounts." "I understand exactly," I replied. Court dates followed. Paperwork, statements, waiting rooms with bad chairs and worse lighting. Courtney avoided my eyes whenever we crossed paths. Her lawyer spoke for her. I spoke for myself. People took sides. Some family members stopped calling. Others apologized quietly. I learned who valued comfort over truth. One afternoon, as I sat in the courtroom listening to motions and dates, I felt a flicker of doubt. Not about the facts, but about the cost. Was peace worth this kind of fallout? Then I remembered the allowance, the lies, the vacations I paid for while wondering if I could afford new shoes. Courtney's assets were frozen. Her car was flagged. Her employer was notified. Consequences stacked up faster than excuses. She cornered me outside the courthouse one day, eyes wild, voice low. "You're ruining my life," she hissed. I looked at her and felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not rage, just distance. "No," I said. "I stopped letting you ruin mine." As I walked away, I knew the hardest part wasn't over yet. I should have paid attention to what happened next. The courtroom was colder than it needed to be. Not physically, though the air conditioning had that government building chill, but emotionally. The kind of cold that settles into your bones when you realize this isn't a family disagreement anymore. It's a public reckoning. Courtney sat at the defense table with her lawyer, hair pulled back tighter than usual, hands clasped so firmly her knuckles looked pale. She didn't glance in my direction. Not once. I wondered if she was afraid to see me or afraid of what she might feel if she did. I sat behind the prosecutor, my purse on my lap, documents neatly arranged the way I'd always done when preparing for a meeting. Old habits die hard. Around me were strangers, clerks, officers, a few other people waiting their turn, but this moment felt intensely personal. When the prosecutor began laying out the timeline, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, recognition. 8 years of deposits, 8 years of withdrawals, a consistent monthly allowance transferred back to me, luxury expenses, travel, a car lease that cost more than my first mortgage payment. It sounded different spoken out loud, larger, harder to dismiss. Courtney's lawyer tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a family arrangement. Caregiving compensation, he called it. I almost laughed at that phrase. Almost. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. The room felt very quiet then. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize anything. I just told the truth the way I'd learned to do over decades in offices where facts mattered more than feelings. I never agreed to give my daughter my pension, I said. I agreed to live with her after my husband died because I trusted her. The judge asked me a few questions. Did I understand where my money was going? Had I authorized the transfers? Had I been aware of the full amounts? No, I said to each one, calmly, clearly. Courtney finally looked at me then. Her eyes were red, her expression incredulous, like she still expected me to stop this. Like a mother stepping in at the last second to smooth things over. For a fleeting moment, I almost did. Then she shook her head and muttered, "Unbelievable." That word snapped whatever hesitation remained. When the judge announced the conviction weeks later, it didn't come with fanfare. No gasps, no dramatic pause. Just a sentence read into the record, consequences laid out in legal language. Guilty. Restitution ordered. Assets subject to seizure. Courtney's shoulders sagged. Her lawyer whispered urgently. I sat still, hands folded, heart beating steadily for the first time in a long while. Outside the courtroom, family gathered in awkward clusters. My sister approached me slowly. I didn't want to believe it, she said. I'm sorry. I nodded. That was all I had the energy for. Courtney pushed past us, her face flushed, phone pressed to her ear. They can't do this, she said into it. I'll appeal. I'll fix it. Her car was repossessed 2 weeks later. I heard through a cousin who still spoke to her. Then came the job loss. Apparently, her employer didn't appreciate felony convictions related to financial fraud. Who knew? She filed for bankruptcy not long after, thinking, hoping, it would wipe the slate clean. It didn't. Restitution doesn't disappear that easily. The first payment arrived 3 months later. A check. Modest. Court-ordered. I deposited it quietly without ceremony. It wasn't about the money anymore. Not really. I settled into my apartment, bought groceries without asking permission, planned a small trip with Margaret, slept through the night. One afternoon, Courtney called. The number came up on my phone, and I stared at it for a long time before answering. Her voice sounded different, tired, stripped of confidence. Was it worth it? She asked. I thought about the years I'd lived smaller than I needed to, about the allowance, about silence. Yes, I said. She hung up without another word. As I set the phone down, a question settled into my mind. Quiet, persistent, unavoidable. Did she ever believe she'd have to face consequences at all? The thing about consequences is that they don't arrive all at once. They trickle in, quietly, relentlessly. And once they start, they don't ask anyone's permission. Courtney moved out of the house she'd been so proud of not long after the bankruptcy filing. I didn't see it myself. But I heard about it through the same cousin who had always enjoyed passing along news like it was neighborhood gossip. The house was too expensive without my pension propping up her lifestyle. Utilities fell behind. Credit cards maxed out. The illusion finally collapsed under its own weight. I wasn't surprised. I'd been running numbers my entire adult life. You can't spend more than you earn forever. Eventually, arithmetic wins. The restitution order arrived in the mail one afternoon, printed on thick paper with official seals that meant business. 20 years. Monthly payments, interest included. The total had grown to $342,000 by the time it was finalized. I read it once. Then again. Then I set it down and made myself a cup of tea. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was alignment. The world had tilted back into something resembling fairness. Courtney fought it at first. Appeals, delays, motions. Her lawyer warned her wouldn't go anywhere. Each attempt cost her more money she didn't have. Eventually, even defiance becomes exhausting. She took 2 minimum wage jobs, one at a grocery store, one cleaning offices at night. I learned this not because I asked, but because people talk, especially when someone who once lived loudly is suddenly forced to live quietly. There was a strange symmetry to it all. I had lived carefully while funding extravagance I never enjoyed. Now I lived comfortably, and she scraped by, paying for choices she couldn't undo. My own life shifted in small but meaningful ways. I set up my pension to deposit directly into my new account. I reviewed every statement myself. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because I'd earned the right to know. I redecorated the apartment slowly. A new lamp, a second-hand bookshelf, fresh curtains that let in morning light. I joined a walking group, took a short trip with Margaret to see the leaves change in Vermont, paid for it outright. No guilt, no permission required. One afternoon, while standing in line at the pharmacy, I ran into Courtney unexpectedly. She looked thinner, older. The confidence that once filled every room had shrunk into something defensive. She avoided my eyes at first. Then, abruptly, she didn't. "They make it sound like I planned it," she said, voice low. Like I sat there thinking, how do I hurt my own mother? I studied her face, looked for the daughter I'd raised, the one who used to bring home crayon drawings and ask if I liked them. "You didn't have to plan it," I said. "You just kept going." She swallowed. "I didn't think you'd notice." That, finally, was the truth. I nodded once. "I know." She shifted her weight, uncomfortable. "They treat me like a criminal now." "You were convicted of a felony," I said gently. "That's what happens." She scoffed, but there was no real fire behind it. Just fatigue. We stood there awkwardly until the line moved. When it was my turn, I paid and stepped aside. Courtney lingered, staring at the counter like it might explain how things had ended up this way. As I walked out into the afternoon sun, I felt something close to peace. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just acceptance. The restitution payments continued. Small amounts, consistent. They arrived like clockwork. Proof that accountability, once set in motion, doesn't require your continued involvement. I stopped checking Courtney's situation after a while. It wasn't my responsibility anymore. My focus turned forward. One evening, sitting by my window watching cars pass, I realized something that made me smile. The power had never been about control. It had been about clarity. And now that clarity was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, that's when I realized I'd had it all wrong. The sentence didn't change my life all at once. It adjusted it, like turning a dial you didn't realize had been set too low for years. Courtney was ordered to repay every dollar, plus interest. The judge explained it plainly without embellishment. Restitution doesn't disappear with bankruptcy. It follows you. It waits. It collects. I watched Courtney absorb that information in stages. First disbelief, then calculation, then the slow understanding that this wasn't a problem she could outtalk or outmaneuver. The system had very little interest in her intentions. It cared about records, dates, amounts. The same things she'd assumed I'd never look at. After that day, my involvement became minimal. That surprised some people. They expected me to attend every hearing, track every consequence, savor every loss. But that wasn't who I was. I'd never been motivated by spectacle. The payments started arriving regularly. $1,500 a month, court-ordered, automatically deducted. I didn't celebrate the first one. I filed it. Then I made myself lunch. What did feel different was the quiet. Not the tense quiet of walking on eggshells, but the settled quiet of a life that finally belonged to me again. No one monitored my spending. No one questioned my decisions. No one framed control as care. Family gatherings changed. Some relatives avoided me at first, unsure which version of the story to believe. Others pulled me aside and admitted they'd suspected something for years but hadn't wanted to interfere. I listened without correcting them. Everyone arrives at the truth in their own time. Courtney stopped attending most events. When she did show up, she kept her distance. Conversations were polite, surface level. We became two women connected by history rather than relationship. It wasn't what I'd envisioned when I became a mother, but it was honest. One afternoon, my sister came over with a pie and an apology she'd clearly rehearsed. "I should have supported you sooner," she said. "I just never imagined—" "I know," I replied. "None of us want to imagine it." That was the theme that kept returning. Imagination. Or the lack of it. We struggle to picture betrayal wearing a familiar face. We confuse proximity with loyalty, love with entitlement. I settled into routines that felt quietly luxurious. Morning walks, weekly lunches with Margaret, a book club where no one rushed me through my thoughts. I planned a longer trip the following spring. Nothing extravagant. Just something I'd postponed for years because I'd been taught to be practical. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent decades being responsible, careful, sensible. And yet it was only when I insisted on clarity that stability followed. Courtney's life, from what I heard, stayed difficult. 2 jobs, long hours, constant supervision from probation. She didn't complain publicly anymore. There was no audience for it. Accountability tends to shrink drama. Once, months later, she sent me a text. No greeting, just a sentence. "I never thought you'd go this far." I stared at it for a while before responding. "I never thought I'd have to." That was the last direct exchange we had. As time passed, the anger people expected me to feel never arrived. What replaced it was something steadier, a grounded understanding of my own limits, of what I would and wouldn't accept, of how easily patience can be mistaken for permission. I learned to sleep deeply again, the kind of sleep where you don't wake up replaying conversations or wondering what you missed, the kind where morning feels like a continuation instead of a confrontation. One evening, while reorganizing a drawer, I came across an old envelope. Inside were handwritten notes my husband used to leave me on the kitchen counter. Reminders, jokes, little observations about the world. One line stood out. "Trust is precious. Spend it carefully." I smiled at that. He'd always had a way of saying things plainly. People sometimes ask me if I regret taking action, if the cost was too high, if losing a daughter, in the traditional sense, was worth financial justice. I tell them the truth. I didn't lose a daughter that day. I lost an illusion. And in return, I gained my life back. There was one last detail, though, something I didn't share publicly at the time, something that changed how I understood the entire story. What I learned later reframed everything I thought I knew. The last thing I learned came quietly. No courtroom, no phone call from the prosecutor, just a sentence spoken too casually to be accidental. I was having lunch with Margaret when she mentioned it, stirring her iced tea, the way she always did when she was trying to soften something unpleasant. "You know," she said, "Courtney tried to get power of attorney years ago." I looked up. "She did what?" Margaret nodded. "Right after your husband passed. She asked a lawyer about it, said it would simplify things." I didn't say anything right away. My appetite vanished, but I kept chewing, more out of habit than hunger. Power of attorney. That hadn't been about helping. That would have made everything legal, clean, invisible. "She didn't qualify," Margaret continued. "Apparently you were still fully competent, too independent." I smiled then, a small one, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes but settles somewhere deeper. That was the moment the entire story clicked into place. This hadn't started as desperation, or confusion, or grief. It had started as a plan that didn't quite work the way she'd hoped. When paperwork failed, she settled for control by assumption, by silence, by the belief that I'd never challenge her version of things. In a strange way, that realization freed me from the last remaining weight I didn't know I was carrying. I stopped wondering where I'd gone wrong. I stopped replaying conversations, searching for the moment I should have spoken up sooner. Because the truth was simple. They mistook my silence for ignorance. That line came to me one morning as I watched sunlight stretch across my living room floor. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper and tucked it into a drawer. Not as a reminder of bitterness, but as a marker of growth. Life after all of this settled into something ordinary and satisfying. My pension arrived like clockwork. The restitution payments followed. I learned how to budget for pleasure instead of survival. I travelled more. Not extravagantly, but intentionally. A weekend here, a short flight there. Experiences I'd postponed because practicality had always come first. Courtney and I exist now on separate paths. We exchange nothing beyond what the court requires. There are no holidays together, no dramatic confrontations, just distance, chosen and maintained. Some people think distance is cruel. I think it's honest. I've been asked, more than once, if I ever forgave her. I usually answer with another question. What would forgiveness change? It wouldn't restore trust. It wouldn't rewrite the past. And it wouldn't teach the lesson that mattered most. I didn't get angry. I got informed. That became my second truth. Another line worth keeping. At 73, I learned that dignity doesn't require noise. It doesn't demand revenge or applause. Sometimes it simply requires standing up, quietly, and refusing to be managed any longer. My life now is smaller than it once was, but it's entirely mine. Every dollar, every decision. Every morning I wake up without the weight of not knowing. And that, I've learned, is wealth of the highest kind. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever trusted someone who treated that trust like an opportunity, know this: you're not foolish for believing, but you are allowed to stop. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Echo Lens Stories. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me continue sharing these stories that matter. Thank you for listening.